everyone, Reaper here again with another video. Just move this just a little closer so you could definitely hear me this time. Good. Okay, this time I'm going to be doing a contest video for BryanSpaceboy227, his 100 subscriber contest video. Congratulations, Bryan. I believe you are now over 100 subscribers, so congrats to you. I am sure that there are going to be plenty more to come. I first heard about Bryan, I first met Bryan on the internet through the great legend, another one of my most favorite people on YouTube, Rob. Being him, I would definitely consider him a friend of mine. We've had great conversations off the internet and so forth, and love his live chats, all his live chats, his truth videos, and everything else. But that is where I first met Bryan Spaceboy, and we subbed to each other, and I saw that he was having this contest, and a lot of people have been entering this contest, so that's really cool. It's a really cool contest. Basically, you have to show your top 3 favorite books, or any variation of that are in your collection. So I've picked out 3 books. I'm pretty sure, I have a lot of favorite books, but the last one I'm going to show is my absolute favorite, but the other 2 are some of my favorites, but I have more of a story to tell with some of these. That's the route I seem to be going nowadays with all my story videos. So I appreciate everybody that's been supporting me on those. So I'm going to try to do a little bit of that in this contest video with these books. But like I said, the last one I'm going to show is my absolute favorite, and I'm pretty sure you all know what that is. But I'll give you a story about it, okay? So the first one I want to show off to everybody is a book that you've seen in other videos, and I've touched up on briefly, and I will touch up again on my year 2 1994 My History of Comic Collecting video coming out, is The Amazing Spider-Man 129. Now, why is this one so popular to me? Why is this so meaningful to me? Well, long before the TV series that's coming out on Netflix, back in 1994 is when I first bought that book. And the reason why it's so special to me is because it was the first book that I, really was able to buy that is in really, really great shape and that cost a decent amount of money. Back then, I was buying books, I would go to cons, and local cons and so forth in town that were in recreational halls and so forth, and my local comic book shop in town, which had no wall books, just new books. So I was buying books like that were relatively cheap. Back then they were $1, $1.25 or whatever. A special edition would be $1.50 or $1.75. But those are the books I was getting. Buying the 2099 books, SpiderMan and Doom and the X-Men. But come 1994, although by then I got a few decent books, whether they were low grade or not really didn't matter. I had them, I really liked them, but I really wanted to get a special book, and I narrowed it down to 4, and I wound up going with this one, and I'll tell you why in another video, but this was the one that I wound up going for. And it just so happened, because I didn't know anything about grading or anything like that. It's probably an 8.5. Maybe 9. If it were pressed, it'd probably come out to a 9.2, 9.4. So it's in pretty good shape. It does have a little defect here and there, but nothing too big. It's I think I did okay with my first big purchase. But I bought this back in 1994, so back then it wasn't going for the price it's going for now. But even back then, it was pretty expensive. When I spent the money, what I paid for it, that was a big chunk of change. I had to get that money out of my savings account. I just couldn't, in order for me to save up, whether it was an allowance or whatever, in order to get that book, it would have taken me probably a year to do so. So I had I made a decision back then that I was going to spend a certain amount of money on a book, and it turned out to be The Punisher. I really liked The Punisher. I was familiar with him, and I wanted to add that book into my collection, and I was really big at that time into Spider-Man. I started with X-Men, and more on that in a minute. I started with X-Men, then I went into Spider-Man, then as the years went on, I used to love collecting Spawn. Back then, I loved Spawn, those first few issues. Well, not the first few issues, the first run of Spawn. I just thought they were so good. I just loved it, and I loved Todd McFarlane's art. And I held a grudge against him back then because he left Marvel, because at that time I liked what Marvel was doing. But I was so proud of having this book. I used to, try to draw my own cover swipe of it back then. I still have them too, to this day from back in 1994, but I would try to draw my own cover swipe. Sorry for the glare that you're getting. But I brought this to school with me. To show off this one guy that was in my class that was a big Marvel fan. He liked Spider-Man. He liked it. And for all the years that I've had this, I'm amazed that I haven't done anything to it to adversely affect the grade. Not that I was ever careless with any of my stuff. Comics, figures, or as you can see with my games, they're all complete. I was always good with that sort of thing. But, it's paper, right? A lot of things could happen. You could see more damage on a piece of paper, which is what a comic book is, a group of pieces of paper, rather than, let's see here, this one, rather than a video game. Not much damage. But if you did that to this, depending on how much force, you could possibly do a little damage to it. But I'm very happy that I was able to keep it in such nice shape for all these years. So that's why that book is important to me. Let's move on to the next book. Uncanny XMen, well, it's really the X-Men #1. Back in 1993, within the first few months of collecting, I was able to secure for $35 a coverless copy of X-Men #1. And that was my X-Men #1 for a long time. Even back then, we talk about the prices from then to now. Yes, prices now are much more than what they were back then. But even back then, everything sometimes is relative. Back then, an X-Men #1 for somebody like me who was in high school, or even somebody, that young man that was probably just starting out at 22, 23, it was expensive to get. So I thought back then that, that coverless copy that I bought would be the only copy I would ever get. And just the idea of being able to get, a complete copy, one with a cover. It has its problems. It's 3.0, but, really, you should, like I've said, it doesn't matter. As long as you're happy with something, that's great. And I'm very happy with this. I'm very happy with all my books. But to finally get a major Marvel Silver Age book. Marvel had, really rocked it and took over during the 60s from DC, who had, pretty much a stranglehold on the comic industry at that time with all their great titles and characters. But come 61, 62, 63, 64, that's when Marvel really kicked DC in the nuts. And the X-Men #1 was one of those titles, along with Fantastic Four and Amazing Fantasy, Amazing Spider-Man. So to have a major Marvel Silver complete in any grade, I think is awesome, So it's very meaningful to me, especially since X-Men, they were the first superhero team that I really fell in love with. They really cemented me into my comic collecting habits back then, and really provided me a great foundation to this very day. I look at one of these books like, Amazing 29, and I remember the snowstorm that happened the days before I purchased this. I look at this and I'm brought back to the spring of 1993. Well, mainly the coverless copy, and me thinking about one day having a covered copy. But I have a photographic memory for what I used to train for. I needed a photographic memory. So I remember sights and sounds and what people say in verbatim. And applying that to going back to 1993 when I first started collecting comics, I remember some things that I think a lot of people would forget. simple facial expressions people were making, insignificant things like that. So whenever I see something like this that makes me travel back to that time, I remember everything. I remember the weather. I remember the smells. I remember the people. I remember the conversations. I remember the feelings. So it's a real passionate sort of thing for me to journey back to that time. And these books, Spidey 129, X-Men #1, certainly do that for me. Now, the last book, which should come as no surprise to everybody, is my wonderful Detective 140. Now, some people may say, well, yeah, that's cool, but what's the big deal with Detective 140? Obviously, there are better books out there. There are always better books out there. Many facets of that, many better books as in terms of key, condition, you name it. But the reason why the Riddler is so important to me is because when up here in, I don't know how it was in the rest of the country at the time, but back in 1989 when the Batman movie came out, here Channel 11 would put on, was putting in rerun the Batman 66 series to capitalize on the success of the movie that was coming out. And that's where really my first introduction with Batman came. Well, not really the first introduction. Really, it was the movie that was my first introduction. But my introduction to his mythos. All the other characters. Yeah, I knew the Joker, but because I knew the Joker from the movie. As for other characters like the Catwoman and the Penguin and Mr. Freeze, they were all introduced to me from that 66 show. And if you were a villain on that 66 show, you were immortalized. It doesn't matter how lame you may have seemed, like Mr. Freeze was for so many years, up until the Batman the Animated Series gave him an awesome backstory and made him a credible character. But if you were on that show, you were immortalized, even if you were a villain. And for me, the Riddler was that, that character, other than the Joker, that I really, really liked. I had liked his look. I liked the way Frank Gorshin portrayed him. I liked what he did, the whole thing with the riddles. I've never been good with riddles. I couldn't solve a riddle to save my life. We live in this, if we ever try to create a fantasy where if you could be a Batman villain, which villain would you be? Well, I would love to be the Riddler because he's my favorite, but I really don't have the skill of, doing riddles and all that stuff. Actually, with my background, if I were to villainize myself in the Batman universe, I would probably have a lot more in common with the Scarecrow for many reasons, but that's another video. But seeing Frank Gorshin play this character on that 89 series, if you saw the series or saw pictures of him on the internet, he looks exactly like this. Exactly, with the hair slicked back, the domino mask, the unitard, everything. Even the Joker from the 66 series didn't quite look like the Joker up until that point in comics. I thought that the suit he was wearing was way too light. I'm colorblind, but I could even tell that suit really didn't match the color scheme that much with the Joker that was in the comics. But that was okay. That's fine. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I just like the way it was. What you saw here is what you got on that TV series. It was really, really cool. And even though the Penguin, I think, is probably the second most recognizable Batman villain, I think. I could be wrong, what do I know? But I tend to think that the Penguin is the second most recognizable character. But I don't think by far he is the second most popular Batman villain. I think, personally, that the Riddler is the second most popular. And it's not just because, he's my favorite. No, I honestly do. I even in the comic realm, the Riddler's first appearance is highly sought out. They're all sought out, of course, like Penguin and Red Hood and Mr. Freeze and so forth. But I think the Riddler is very sought out. And it only increases, the importance of the character I think, to the comic book community and to me. So seeing that 89 series really started my love for the Riddler, and John Glover's portrayal of him in Batman the Animated Series, his voice portrayal of him, only made that character even cooler to me. I liked the new look that he had, even though it wasn't a real new look. Frank Gorshin actually showed up on the series dressed in the suit and the bowler cap. But on the animated series, that was the common thing for him. I just thought that the way John Glover played him, voiced him, was just so great. He really was, like up there with Mark Hamill, with one of the better Riddler performances. There haven't been too many Riddler performances. You had Frank Gorshin, John Glover, Jim Carrey, which I thought sucked. I don't like anything with Jim Carrey, but I didn't think he was that good. And this new guy, Corey Michael Smith, he's okay. He looks like the Riddler. But I really think that John Glover and Frank Gorshin did the character justice, and I only hope that if the Riddler shows up in one of the new movies or whatever, they really, really do him further justice. So that's the reason why this book is so important to me, because of this character. Well, I went on for about 16 minutes. Once again, for everybody that entered the contest, good luck. I saw a lot of great videos, and some really good books. So it was really cool. So Bryan, you definitely came up with an awesome contest. You really have, brother. And best of luck. I know you're going to get more and more subscribers. Thank you for having this contest. And everybody, thanks for watching. Please subscribe to BryanSpaceboy227. Enter his contest. Show some support. And I will see you all later. Take care.